Amy is the Joint National Secretary of the Socialist Workers' Party, and she has written the pamphlet Capitalism and the Politics of Food, and she's also a contributor to system change, not climate change. So, there you go, that's entertainment, isn't it? Stop that happening. So, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Amy, who's going to speak for about 30 minutes. So, thanks all for coming. Amy.
Okay, well, thanks Tom. Hopefully people can hear me. Just going to do a mic check. Yeah, great. Well, look, as I'm sure we're all aware in this room, we face a climate catastrophe if action is not taken to drastically cut global carbon emissions. In April, the IPCC warned it's now or never to cut global emissions to prevent just the worst effects of climate collapse. Meanwhile, the question of war has been made very real to us in Britain and Europe by the war in Ukraine, a bloody war grinding on with the potential to escalate further, even putting on the agenda the possibility of devastating nuclear war. And what I want to argue in this meeting is that both climate change and war are consequences of the same system, that of capitalism, and that the question of energy is central to both. Because there is a very simple solution to climate change. Stop burning fossil fuels. Leave coal, oil and gas in the ground. They are responsible for the bulk of emissions. Make a rapid switch to renewables. Studies show if you combine that with a massive increase in energy efficiency, that's possible. But we know this has been fiercely resisted. And the failure of COP26 is the latest example of the lack of action. And what I want to explore in this meeting is how fossil fuels became central to development of capitalism, meaning they're locked into the system. That's why there's such resistance to breaking from them. But also how war has been a part of this, helping to cement the role of fossil fuels into national economies. Some wars have been fuelled by competition for energy resources, but wars themselves, in particular the Second World War, have had major consequences for energy supplies and a nation-state's energy strategy. And what is clear about decisions about energy, throughout the history of capitalism, they have been very much determined by class interests. And this continues today, doesn't it? Not only do we face a climate crisis, war, but a deepening cost of living crisis, where energy prices have soared. There is a massive squeeze on working class people. So this is what I want to explore, the nature of climate change and war, how fossil fuels have become so central to capitalism, and what both climate change and the war in Ukraine could mean for energy, including the very dangerous rehabilitation of nuclear power, and then crucially how we shape the future of energy in our own class interests. Now, the first thing to say before we go any further is that capitalism is inherently anti-ecological, even without the use of fossil fuels. It's an immensely destructive system, driven by competition for profit, divided by class. And this competition between rival firms at the heart of capitalism means it relates to the natural world differently from previous societies. In fact, the natural environment is something just to be exploited for profit or a rubbish dump for the system's unwanted products. And the drive for profit means it's irrational and unplanned. There is waste at every level. So capitalism itself can only be seen as an unsustainable society. But fossil fuels are locked in. Coal and then oil were at the heart of the industrial development of capitalism. The adoption of fossil fuels on a mass scale was actually not an accident. It was a way for capitalists to better exploit workers. It also helped them seize control of areas of the world. And I'm going to come back and explore this in a moment. But first, I just want to look at how that dynamic of competition that's central to capitalism also leads to war. Because as Marxists, we have a very specific understanding of imperialism. In fact, the Russian revolutionary Lenin called imperialism the highest stage of capitalism. And crucially here, imperialism is a global system of rival competing capitalist states, a system where powerful capitalist states compete to dominate the world. Now, sometimes imperialism is described of how that economic competition at the heart of capitalism spills into military competition. But I think more specifically and accurately, Alex Kalinikos, who's done meetings here at Marxism, has described imperialism as a fusion between geopolitical competition and economic competition. You see, geopolitical battles over territory do predate capitalism. There's been battles over states over territory for thousands of years by rival ruling classes. But under capitalism, at the end of the 19th century, this fuses with that economic competition that is at the heart of the system, its driving force. And in this analysis, I think it's really important to understand imperialism as a system of competing capitalist states. Because sometimes imperialism is characterised by this idea there's one strong state bullying and dominating all the others. Now, there is plenty of bullying and dominating going on by different states, but there is a number of stronger states here, not just one. You could probably identify 6 leading imperialist powers: US, China, Russia, Britain, France, Germany. And there are also what you might call sub-imperialist powers attempting to dominate in their particular region. And again, we should also be clear, imperialism is not just about invading another country for immediate gain, just to plunder its resources to be used. This can be a factor. But it's how these competing states extend their global influence to be able to expand markets into new areas, yes, to access resources, but crucially to control resources. And part of that is to keep their competitor countries out. And here, energy is a big consideration. Energy is what you might call a strategic commodity. Whoever controls access to it has power over other states. Now, for example, the war and invasion of Iraq back in 2003 by the US and Britain is sometimes said to be a war for oil. And of course, in many ways it was. Iraq and the wider region definitely have oil. But it wasn't the case the US just needed that oil for its own immediate consumption at that point. It was actually expanding some of its own production. It had a lot of resources, reserves in Latin America. It was really very crucially about stopping other countries having access to that region, particularly China, the US's major competitor, from controlling it, as well as wider considerations actually, which was about the US wanting to assert its power on the world stage after the attack of 9/11. But what we can see throughout the history of capitalism is how the fossil fuel economy, which develops first in Britain, is driven out across the world through this dynamic of economic competition, but also crucially military competition and the colonialism of the 1800s and imperialism up until today. And that's what I want to look at now in a bit more detail. So as I say, capitalism adopted fossil fuels on a mass scale during the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. Now, let's be clear, the birthplace of what you might call this fossil economy is Britain. And in the 1800s, an energy transition takes place. There is a shift from using mainly water power, things like giant water wheels, to power the early machines of the textile industry, to using steam power generated from coal. Not inevitable, because actually water was free. It predominated actually in the early years of industrialisation. But steam power won out in the end because the use of coal enabled capitalists to better exploit workers because it was mobile. You could move coal to where the workers were in the cities, rather than having to take the workers to where the water was in the rural areas, in which case they had to build houses, infrastructure, and also being in the cities meant there was a ready supply of replacement workers in case of strikes and unrest. So the use of coal to generate steam gave capitalists better control over their workers. So you do see, from the start of industrialisation, these class interests shape energy decisions. Now, of course, the capitalists who adopted steam power really in the 1820s, they didn't know then they were putting the world on course for catastrophic climate change. But actually the impact could be seen. You have a terrible air quality in cities like Manchester that workers complained about and Engels wrote about in the condition of the working class. But the introduction of steam unleashes this process, a path of development with fossil fuels at its heart, because the nature of competition means that once one capitalist adopts it, they all did. And so coal becomes this energy base of production, driving the new machinery in the new mills, also transport, the introduction of steam trains, and this shift to coal doesn't just stay in Britain. As I say, other countries have to follow suit to compete, but also through military invasion and competition it's driven through. So coal is central to energy itself, but opens up a new age of military force as well, where powerful nations actually seek to use it to expand their colonial power. Steam trains and railways, very important commercially, but also very helpfully give you military advantage. You can send soldiers quicker to areas. So governments piled a lot of money into coal mining and railways, putting in cash, land grants, large military contracts. And not just the railways. Coal allows the development of steamships, coal-powered gunboats, meaning Britain and other countries can start seizing control over territories in Asia, Africa, the Middle East that had long resisted conquest. Because before steam power, Britain had built its empire through wind power and sailing ships. It actually won supremacy on the seas, but it was still restricted by wind. Steam changes this. It sets the empire free, if you like, of these restrictions of weather, landscape. So again, you see how coal gives more control to those at the top of society. The captains of steamships can go against the wind and tide. And they first used steamboats on the battlefield of war in 1840. They used steamboats to defeat a rebellious Egyptian ruler, Muhammad Ali. Now, he'd become a threat to the British Empire, partly because he was carving out his own Arab empire, but very crucially, he wanted to develop a modern cotton industry that would threaten British profits. So they sent 4 steamships down the coast to destroy his forces. And these steamships were able to fire from the sea. They killed nearly 2,000 people. No one on the steamships hurt at all. Muhammad Ali's empire fell. And the cotton industry in Egypt collapsed, and its lands converted to production of raw cotton for British mills. Again, a year later, in 1841, steam proves crucial to British victory in the First Opium War, squadron of steamboats prizing open China for trade. And you see how Britain and France and Germany all used steamboats in colonial wars, if you like, shifting the balance of military power between Europe and even the strongest Asian and African societies. And it enables these colonial powers to extend their reach. And then also they can secure more fossil fuels. You know, these naval expeditions are then sent to find more deposits of coal and actually enable these colonial powers to steal natural and mineral resources, wealth and people from around the world. And actually, some people have pointed out how this also fuels a racist narrative, actually, that links technological achievement and military power to this supposed superiority of European and North American powers over others and people of the global south. So I think you begin to see in this vision how these fossil fuels are driven out beyond Britain, as I say, through economic and military competition, and how this then is accelerated big time with the arrival of oil. The first commercial oil well was drilled in the late 1850s. It transformed what was possible because actually in economic terms, oil is a very cheap form of energy. And then you have the invention of the internal combustion engine, the airplane in 1903, creating a market for petroleum. And the discovery of oil, if you like, coincides with this period from 1850, when capitalism is expanding, and we're seeing the development, as what I've talked about, imperialism, as this system of competing states. And you start seeing these first, if you like, military-industrial complexes emerge, European, North American, Japanese companies actually entering into long-term development projects with army and navy contractors. So we see military needs helping shape, actually, again, the post-coal, now oil, fossil fuel era. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, imperial armies become major customers for gasoline. And there's a big breakthrough for the use of petroleum as a fuel in Britain in 1912. This is the year that the decision is taken to convert the battleships that I've talked about from coal to oil. And again, a decision driven by class interests, because the only source of coal that was required, that could be used by the battleships, was in the Welsh mines. And in 1910, there'd been some strikes in these pits, and the army had to be sent in to break them. So when Winston Churchill took control of the army in 1911, he converted them to oil because he was worried about the impact of strikes on the Navy's ability to fight overseas. Then we have, obviously, the First and Second World Wars, where oil becomes this absolute key strategic resource for the global economy. You know, the planes, the ships, the submarines, the tanks, the lorries, all need oil to fuel them. But it's actually after the Second World War that the use of fossil fuels accelerates massively. This is when there is a very steep increase in carbon emissions. Total world energy consumption more than triples in the post-war period. But this didn't just start from scratch when the war ended. Actually, the conditions for this were created through what happened during the war. Because oil was decisive for World War II in terms of victory. There had been massive government injections of money, particularly in the United States, into oil-related industries to help the war effort. For example, the car industry there stopped commercial production, made 2 million jeeps and trucks. They put money into petrochemical plants to produce nitrogen for explosives, synthetic rubber for tyres, nylon for parachutes, much more. In fact, the US government spent something like $3 billion building and expanding petrochemical plants during the war. Afterwards, they sold these newly updated factories, plants, very cheaply to all the private car, oil and chemical companies, many of which we know today. So if you like, the war laid the groundwork for an economy dominated by oil and paved the way for the age of plastic as well, which is a byproduct of the oil and gas industries. And this massive increase in fossil infrastructure in the US meant in order to compete, again, other countries had to follow suit. And also the US had emerged as the biggest global superpower after the war, and it began to impose its own interests across the globe by tying economic support for European recovery to the purchase of US oil. It did this through the Marshall Plan of 1948. You might have heard of it, sometimes portrayed as, a benevolent plan by the US to help Europe. Actually, its whole role was to strengthen US corporations, particularly oil companies. And basically, European countries were forced to purchase very expensive oil from the US because any money from the Marshall Plan had to be used to buy from US corporations. And this begins to actually reshape Europe's energy use patterns and means that Europe transitions from a dependence on coal to dependence on oil. So, as I say, we see this massive expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure, and in the post-war period, the US uses its dominant role to impose a particular economic model which further solidifies the centrality of fossil fuels in the global economy. So look, I think this pretty short history, if you like, of the industrial development of capitalism then helps us to understand now why there is a lack of action over climate change. Because what it all means is we live in a world today of vast, historic, sunken investments in the fossil fuel industries and economy. The whole infrastructure of capitalism has been built on fossil fuels. First coal, then oil. And also more recently, gas has become central to energy use, sometimes argued cleaner than coal and oil. It's still a fossil fuel and releases things like methane. But the point here is if we were to totally break from fossil fuels and transition to renewables, it would mean writing off an enormous amount of capital. It would mean an end to all those industries like road, aviation, plastics, petrochemicals, industrialised agriculture, very profitable. And so no wonder this is fiercely resisted by the fossil fuel industry. And they spend vast amounts of money lobbying governments to make decisions in their interests. And I think this explains why the COP process has failed for over a quarter of a century, because it's not separate from all this. COP is a rigged process. It's part of capitalism, not a challenge to it. So it actually mirrors the inequality and injustice in the world. In terms of the COP26 last November, the biggest delegation was not those most impacted by climate change, but actually representatives of the oil and gas companies. And COP mirrors capitalism in another way. It is made up from representatives from different nation states, all in competition with each other, all wanting to ensure that their interests are protected. So COP26 failed, as did the previous ones. The targets were not nearly ambitious enough, and they weren't legally binding either, they were voluntary. And already the Guardian newspaper has highlighted there are at least 195 gigantic oil and gas projects, what it calls carbon bombs, currently in production, all of which would mean temperature rises way above the 1.5 degrees we need to keep to. And the US, Canada, Australia, some of the biggest expansion plans. And now we're seeing as well countries like the US and Britain rip up even the minimal pledges made at COP using the excuse of high energy prices and the war in Ukraine. As I say, the war in Ukraine, a murderous conflict that has round on for nearly 5 months, massive human suffering and death. There's other meetings at Marxism specifically on it, exploring it in more detail. We're clear, we think, the invasion by Putin was wrong, Russian troops should get out. But it's also clear that the US and NATO are using the war as a means to extend their own power and influence, pouring in billions of pounds of military aid into the region. Boris Johnson, very much a leading warmonger, lining up with US imperialism. But the war has also shone a light on global energy use. Most obviously, it's led to this great spike in energy prices. Although it is worth noting, prices began to rise last autumn, actually, partly because of the massive demand coming out of the COVID lockdowns and the inability to meet supply. But the war has exacerbated this, because Russia is actually one of the world's largest producers and exporters of both oil and gas. It means other countries are reliant on it, and Europe in particular, very dependent on Russian gas supplies. To be honest, right now, it'd be very difficult to meet world demand for oil and gas without Russia, which means energy prices have soared due to sanctions and Russia cutting its supply in retaliation. It also shows, despite all the pledges at COP, despite the need to reduce fossil fuels, they're still absolutely central to global energy at the moment. And as I say, now the war is being used as an excuse to increase investment in more oil and gas production so that we can become, as they put it, energy self-sufficient. So in Britain, we've begun to see the rollback of some of the gains we've made from the climate movement, the granting of new licences for North Sea oil exploration. Maybe fracking is going to return after its moratorium in 2019, the exploration of the Cambo oil field back on the agenda. Biden, in the US actually, is pretty much abandoned all those green pledges he made, absolutely doing everything to urge more production of oil and gas for America. But it's also accelerating a return to nuclear power. Now, this had already cynically been touted as a solution to climate change. It is now being given added impetus by the idea of energy sovereignty. If you heard the Tories in April when they launched their new energy security strategy, Boris Johnson was clear nuclear power should be central, wanting to increase the amount of electricity from nuclear from 15% as it is today in Britain to 25%. Massive increase in capacity. Now, I want to argue nuclear power is not a solution to our energy needs for a number of reasons. It's not carbon neutral, it's extremely dangerous and expensive, and actually it's been pushed by vested interests. Firstly, though, the whole nuclear industry arose from the needs of war, with the development of first atomic and then hydrogen bombs. And as we know, nuclear weapons were first developed during the Second World War. They were used to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan in August 1945 with horrific consequences. At this stage, there was no question of using nuclear power for energy or electricity. Nuclear reactors were being built just to produce the plutonium and other materials that are needed to make bombs. It wasn't until 1953, actually, that the concept was launched of atoms for peace. This was President Eisenhower in the United States claiming that the nuclear industry could produce good atoms for energy. Now, he did this because actually he wanted to get more support for investment in nuclear arms and weapons. And it was the same in Britain. Nuclear power industry began with a military purpose to get a nuclear bomb. All the British post-war prime ministers were like, we have to get a bomb so we can remain a great power. And the USSR was developing a nuclear bomb, and Britain was absolutely desperate to cooperate with the US, actually. So they thought if they developed their own bomb, they could prove their worth to the Americans. So the first nuclear facility in 1950 opened in Windscale. The reactors there were just about producing plutonium for bombs. So this idea that nuclear power is an energy source is a secondary consideration. And as I say, in part to justify the huge amounts of public money that governments were spending on developing nuclear bombs and weapons and to try and win support. Now, nuclear power is still massively expensive. Now, you maybe could justify that if it would solve the climate crisis, but it won't. It's not carbon-free, as it is often claimed. You see, the nuclear reactions at the heart of the process don't produce greenhouse gases, but actually it ignores the fact that at every stage of the production process, from the mining of uranium to the building of reactors to the storage of waste products, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are pumped into the atmosphere and other pollutants to go into the local environment. Even before plutonium or uranium that's being mined, uranium at the Olympic Dam in Australia, it may be transported thousands of miles to Canada, to France to be enriched, then Japan to be turned into nuclear fuel rods. This is all on ships and on trains and roads, pumping out carbon dioxide. But there is also then the problem of storage and disposal. Very highly dangerous radioactive nuclear waste. This is a big problem. One solution is to bury it underground. That's what the US do with their waste. Bury it in New Mexico. The land will still be contaminated in 300,000 years' time or more. In Japan, they've got 1 million tonnes of water contaminated after the disaster at Fukushima in tanks. They don't know what to do with it. But the point here is that almost more than any other form of energy generation, nuclear power requires quite a complex cycle of mining, transport, generation, storage and disposal, where carbon dioxide is created and added to the atmosphere, not to mention potential environmental damage. And we could talk about the question of safety. The history of the whole nuclear industry is full of accidents, from Chernobyl in 1986 to Fukushima in 2011. Hundreds of others, and many we don't even know about because they were kept secret and covered up. Experts think that actually now, if people expand more nuclear reactors, they'll be more likely to have accidents. And they say that new risk factors, warfare, economic collapse, climate change itself, make nuclear sites perilous places. So why is nuclear so popular with politicians? Why is it being rehabilitated? In part, I think it's because it actually fits with the existing energy infrastructure and so allows capitalism to continue with the business as usual. Because actually in a nuclear power plant, the energy generated by nuclear fission is used to make steam. It drives electrical turbines around. It's very similar to what happens with the heat produced in a coal, gas, oil power station. So it kind of fits with the existing energy infrastructure. Doesn't require a massive break in the same way that use of renewables would. And I think it's part of this capitalism's response to climate change that also is this obsession with technical fixes so they can just carry on with the same, things like carbon capture. And of course, will make some people a lot of money. Not a surprise, Bill Gates, who is the founder of TerraPower, a nuclear company, is an advocate of it. Although it will actually cost us, the taxpayer, actually billions. Because this target of producing a quarter of Britain's electricity from atomic energy is going to require tens of billions of pounds of new investment, they say, from private companies. But apparently the state is going to underwrite that as well. And the promise of cheap energy is a myth too. The costs of construction are astronomical, likely to increase our bills. And as I say, the legacy of clean-ups and waste down to us, £130 billion in Britain already spent decommissioning plants. So I think we have to be clear here, nuclear power is not any sort of green alternative to fossil fuels. In fact, I think it's very much part of the capitalist system that has entrenched fossil fuels and is being pushed to enable that system to continue. So to maybe come towards an end. Hopefully, we've shown here, capitalism causes climate change and war. More capitalism, as was proposed at COP, is not going to solve it. Fossil fuels have been locked into our system, so closely entwined with the growth and development of capitalism, they're inseparable. And capitalism won't even solve the energy crisis on its own terms. The system prioritises profit above all else. It means, while we're struggling to pay energy bills, big corporations are profiteering from energy. You know, the massive increases in our electric and gas bills, or in the cost of filling a car with petrol, they're not an inevitable natural phenomenon. Companies are profiting from this. Shell made over £7 billion in profit in the first 3 months of this year. It immediately gave £4 billion of that to its shareholders. Together with BP, they're on track to grab £50 billion in profits this year. And it's interesting, the price of Brent crude oil, which is the benchmark used for the price of oil, actually it's fallen since the heights it reached at the start of the war in Ukraine, but petrol prices are still going up. They haven't passed that drop in prices onto us. And the need for those gas and oil companies to keep shareholders happy and give them massive payouts means that actually companies have been investing less and less overall in energy infrastructure. That's in part what's making it hard to meet the supply at the moment, now disrupted by the war with Ukraine, never mind the fact they're not investing in renewable infrastructure. So I think our conclusion has got to be, we have got to get rid of the system of capitalism. We actually have to talk about revolutionary change and the complete transformation of society. Socialism is about actually redesigning and transforming our relationship with the natural world in our own interests and in that of a wider ecology. It's about a system based on what is needed, what is rational to produce, doing away with the chaotic profit nature of capitalist society. So I think to prevent catastrophic climate change, build a sustainable society and end war, we have to break from the logic of capitalism. But this is not an abstract question. It's not about just waiting and we'll have a revolution and we'll sort out climate change then. Fighting now will make a difference to the future of energy, and we have to fight to shape it in our class interests. Because through organising collectively, in the past, we have stopped the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure and nuclear power, and we're going to have to do it again as they try and roll back those gains. And we have seen the birth of a global new climate movement in the last few years, which has been fantastic. And there are debates, aren't there, about what happens next. I think a challenge for the movement is how it can keep both its mass character and its militancy. I think we need more disruption and militancy in the movement, not just by individuals or small groups of activists, on a mass scale. And we have new challenges in this. How do we oppose a war that is not in the interest of working class people? How do we fight the cost of living crisis and crucially connect them to this same system? I actually think we have to deepen the links between the climate movement and organised workers. Make the links. Trade unions have been part of climate mobilisations in Britain. We have to fight to bring together the power of workers, mass movements and radical actions. And I think we have an opportunity right now. Strikes and class struggle are back on the agenda. We can learn a lot from the rail strikes. Who does the work in society? Who has power? In fact, strikes are probably some of the most radical actions of all, because they can hit the profits of those vast multinationals that are at the heart of the fossil fuel system and those that drive war. That's why the Tories got so scared, trying to pass new laws, bringing in agency workers to break strikes. So we have to build the links. Brilliant to see climate activists joining the picket lines and rallies by the RMT strikers, actually raising the issue of public transport too. Because every working class person in Britain is being hit by the cost of energy, living crisis and energy price hikes. So we need more strikes, more action to hit back at the Tories and link that to their lack of action over climate and fighting for a future of energy in our interests that is both clean and affordable. So I think we have to link every action and fight now, though, to a call for an end to fossil fuel capitalism, which, as we have seen, is absolutely dripping in the blood of war. And so I think the conclusion of the slogan, system change, not climate change, has to be recognising that capitalism has to go and we need a revolution to uproot it completely.
Thank you so much for that, Amy. That was really fantastic, and hopefully creates a space in which we can all, discuss this further. Marxism is a festival of debate and discussion, so what we're going to do now is have space for discussion. And before I invite people to address the room, what we're going to do is just have 2 or 3 minutes where you can talk to the people next to you about maybe why you've come to this meeting, why you're at Marxism, what you thought of Amy's talk, maybe questions that you have. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up and people will have 3 minutes each to make a contribution, ask a question and so on.
Thank you. This definitely won't last 2 minutes. I just wanted to ask, thank you by the way, Amy, for your talk. I'm a member of the Extinction Rebellion. I'm sure that's going to come up a few more times in this meeting. I just would really like to know your thoughts on how the SWP can mobilise alongside Extinction Rebellion and also Just Stop Oil, which I'm sure other people will mention.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So after the comrade there, we will have the comrade in the black mask and yellow headband at the back, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. My name is Alder. I'm from the far-left Red Party in Norway. I'm also MP in the county in the Trøndelag region in mid-Norway. Thank you for a very good speech. I will further elaborate this because you're talking about the system of energy systems. But it is also when we are transitioning into renewable energy, we should also think about what system of renewable energy should be. And I should place it on a decentralized, democratically organized renewable system, because that's examples of that is not happening now. But for instance, in Norway, our indigenous Sami population are suffering a lot from the wind industry project in the mountains in my region. So I think we have to take into account that renewable energy also could have a lot of problems. But of course we should get rid of the fossil fuels and transit to a renewable system. That should be a democratically decentralized system. Thank you.
So much. So the next speaker will be the comrade in the cap. Thank you.
Just briefly on the nuclear power question, people would be aware that Boris Johnson is trying very hard on, I think, what they're calling modular reactors. It makes it sound very niche and tidy, just little, makes it sound very niche and tidy. It's sort of like something you get from IKEA, snapped together quickly, and there you have your nuclear reactor. But there's a reason why the contribution of nuclear power in Britain, which was one of the many countries that pushed it so hard, the state subsidises it at all our expense. There's a reason why it's actually contributes quite a small amount I think it was 16% of electricity, which is way less than contributions by wind energy, and therefore a much smaller part, 7 or 8% of all energy consumption in the UK. And that is that it's extremely technically difficult. So when the Tories promote it, and always emphasise that at one particular stage it is carbon-free, actually the stage of ignition, if you like, the heating of the water bit, but not the stages before and after. And they're overlooking the fact that despite its huge state subsidies over several decades at our expense, nonetheless, it just doesn't work very well because it's immensely complicated. So, I mean, the reason it's important, not for technical reasons, but it does resurface, doesn't it, occasionally, in, amongst very well-intentioned people who want to try and smash the rule of fossil economy and so on. I mean, George Monbiot bought into it quite a lot. Now, I mean, for me, was just looking at his website, he hasn't written, as far as I could see, anything about the benefits of nuclear power for several years. But nonetheless, there was a time when he seemed to push it quite strongly. But it is not, apart from the hazards that Amy outlined, it cannot in any way be implemented in the time scale now needed. Whereas a further expansion of wind and the problems that the comrades before me mentioned must be addressed, of course. But the further implementation and extension of wind, which is quite considerable in Britain, 50-something% of electricity generation, can be done. And that can really be modular, isn't it? I mean, every time you put down one wind turbine, you have added a little bit to the generation, whereas nuclear power, of course, you have to wait for the whole plant to be ready, which takes years and years. And that is the reason there's only one plant under construction in Britain as well. So it's just, I suppose, a kind of detail, but it does rise amongst well-intentioned people who would use nuclear energy. No, we could. There's a red herring apart from the risks and hazards, and cannot be implemented of anything like the scale needed to address the crisis that has to take.
Thank you, Comrade. So the next speaker will be Comrade just here with a hand up. Okay.
I think socialists need to be very, very clear that the link between war and climate change is cannot be simplified down, as some people on the left and some people in the anti-war movement do, to simply the emissions caused by flying planes, driving tanks, setting fire, dropping bombs, and so on. The link between climate change and war arises out of the question of imperialism. The system of nation-states, a capitalist orientation and in competition with absolutely each other. And if you want to see how that plays out in real life in terms of climate change, look at the COP process. Look at how successive COPs have been smashed apart by different imperialist interests, forcing those negotiations to break down because there's irreconcilable differences between the interests of the Chinese state and the interests of the US. Look at COP15 in Copenhagen, where the US built an alliance of countries to go and smash apart those discussions, to impose an accord that was only beneficial to US capital. That's the legacy of imperialism. What we have to argue, I think, is that imperialism and the capitalist system in general creates the terrain on which climate change plays out. It destroys and impoverishes and breaks countries and parts of the world and regions that makes it harder for those people to deal with climate change and makes the impacts of climate change far, far worse. Look at the countries that are most affected by climate change at the moment. Places like Haiti, places like Yemen, places like Nigeria, places like the Philippines. They're the battlegrounds of colonialism and imperialism and have been destroyed because of a legacy of a system. But the other way it works out is also the same, because climate change shapes the world where imperialism has consequences. You know, the melting ice giving new ways of navies accessing each parts of the world, or new access to resources, or changes in land usage affecting how conflicts play out. The mass displacement of people and how that may lead to conflict and war. You cannot separate climate change and war, and that is why you cannot talk about a simple fight against climate change, because you have to address underlying conditions of a system that drives climate change and makes it worse. So that is why, if you want to address climate change, absolutely get organised around the environment, but also understand that it's part of a broader system that impoverishes, exploits and destroys in the name of profit, which also has to be simply destroyed.
speaker after this one will be the comrade at the front here. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Hi. It's really interesting how you talk about militancy and disruption, because Annie and I insulate Britain, just stop oil. So we've been on the road, we've blocked the oil depots, etc. I just want to say things have gone a bit quiet with Insulate Britain because we're not on the road anymore, but we're all going through the courts. Many of us are in court, many of us have got big fines. In fact, my Crown Court appearance last week was cancelled because the barrister was on strike. We're taking disruption. I don't know if you know this, but not everybody does. So Insulate Britain are taking disruption from the road into the courts, and we are raising our stakes, and where we can, we're getting Crown Court trials, so that we can speak before juries. I feel quite emotional about this because it's all part of what we're trying to do to change the system and spread the words. And if you remember, Insulate Britain we wanted to insulate all of the houses in Britain. We wanted a big national programme to do that. I was moved to join that because of the social aspect, because of the poverty and the inability to pay for fuel, which obviously is getting worse. We were campaigning to save 8,500 ordinary people's lives, because that's what Fuel Poverty Action were telling us, were the number of people that died every year in this country because they could not afford to pay their fuel bills. So many of us came for that reason. We also wanted to create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the insulation industry. The insulation industry said, you guys have done more for us than we've done in decades by going on the road and being unpopular and being slated by the majority of the media and the population. And also that was a national programme would actually see a reduction of 15% in the UK emissions, which is very significant. We were also involved in Just Stop Oil and in the blockading of oil depots in Thurrock, Purfleet. That's where we were, but there were some others up north as well. And the message from Just Stop Oil is no new oil and gas. So the left and the climate activists do need to merge. We do need to support each other. And we are small in number, but we are big in heart and commitment. So if you feel you can join us, help us in any way, even if you can put your money in your hands in your pockets and help us pay our fines, that would be fantastic. And I don't know if you know, but there's about 40 people currently serving short prison sentences around the UK for being involved in Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil and doing disobeying the dog, where we go into the courts and disrupt. Thank you.
Will be the comrade in the bottom corner here. After you. Yeah, sorry.
Is this one?
Yeah.
Thank you to the comrade that spoke before. I can't see your face. Thank you. And also, Amy, I know I came late, but thank you as well. There's so many people, it's a good place to start, so thank you for saying that, because it's greenwashing what they're doing there, and it's greenwashing any time Indigenous rights aren't respected in the face of new power, whatever that may be, whether it's green or a certain shade of red. Let's put it that way. I wanted to just say that war is ecocide and war is colonialism, which is like a flavour of imperialism that I know really well, and my own peoples know really well. I'm Yoruba descendant. So COP and G7 are completely intertwined, and that process also fuels a lot of this militarization that we see, which causes ecocide and destruction, complete destruction of lands, minds and bodies. So I just wanted to say that NATO and COP are both United Nations red herrings and artificial as the borders that define and restrict people such as me from meeting with our siblings in Benin and Togo, and restricting us to Nigeria and specific states within Nigeria. 15% is a really good number as well, because that's the amount that passes through the City of London in the form of financial flows to the rest of the world. So when we say no new oil and gas, we can't just say on this side of the world, because it doesn't work that way. We can't say no new oil and gas in the UK, because again, that is an extent that will just lead to more colonialism I do hear what we're saying. I'm here to have discourse and dialogue. I'm part of a campaign called Global Majority that rejects this notion of ethnic minorities and recognises that a lot of us here are refugees, whether we're identified as that or not, but we've been displaced from our lands and we've been colonised in our minds. So that's what our campaign is about, decolonising our minds, decolonising our lands. And that means very physical, real, material terms. So that is why I personally do believe that Socialist Worker Party has a part to play in that.
Will be the comrade with right in the middle with the hand up now. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Jan from North London, and I just really wanted to give an example of how I think that, from North London, of how the question of class, the question of your attitude towards imperialism and being an environmentalist all came together. In North London, we in XR argued that we should go to the local bus garage during the time that the students were closing down London's, Fridays for a Future. There's a 91 bus that runs right through the city, and those bus drivers are obviously idling in the traffic for hours while the protest takes place. Why don't we take the message there? The message, we took young climate activists to the bus garage. I think lots of people in XR were a bit nervous about it. They thought, oh my God, this is going to be confrontational. Actually, what happens in the meeting is that here you have bus drivers from across the entire world who all have their own experiences of the effect of imperialism and colonialisation, the effect of climate change. So a bus driver from Nigeria talks about what the Shell oil had done to the Ngoni people, Ken Saro-Wiwa, talks about what's happened in Nigeria as a result of the oil companies. Another person, bus driver, is from Lebanon. He tells a very moving story about how he used to swim in the river at home as a child. That's where they played. Now he takes his children back to Lebanon, to his hometown. The river is dry. There's nowhere for people to get water. Other bus drivers talk about the impact of how supportive they are of what's happening in the centre of London in the protests, because they're the people having to sit in the blazing heat with their windows open, because there isn't ventilation in most of the buses, idling with the engines on, and they are working in situations where it's 20% or at least over and above the safe limits to drive pollution in London. And this was a brilliant example of how we pull these things together. We took climate students into the local authority. Islington has greenwashing to perfection, but we had a discussion with the workers in the council about the real changes that needed to be made, not the greenwashing, not the tick boxes, but what really fundamental changes, which wouldn't save the local authority money, but would cost them money. This is what I think, this is the strategy of the SWP. How can we meld together? And we should not be shy of putting the arguments about climate catastrophe to workers, because they are the people with the power, but also are often the people with the best experiences in order to change them.
Just on the end here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Somewhat echoing Jen, my name's Roxanne, I'm a supporter of the Bolshevik tendency. I wanted to hear Amy's further thoughts on how we could join together what you call the mass character of the movement and militancy. And obviously, the obvious answer is working class action. It was interesting to hear from the comrade from Insulate Britain and some of the overlap potentially with the creation of jobs, retraining in renewables, that's going to be part of it. But I suppose as revolutionaries, what we need to also do is have that political struggle in the debate. Because what I feel like is always missing is transitional demands that argue explicitly against, for example, Green New Dealism. And I think the Green New Deal is one of our biggest political roadblocks, actually, as is any kind of stagism. People like Bellamy Foster, who make so many interesting arguments and who so many people look to, and who I've learned a lot from reading his stuff. Of course, his political conclusion is still, what does he call it? Eco-democracy, then eco-socialism. It's stagism. And what really frustrates me is that if we do not distinguish between two ultimately opposing roads, reform and revolution, we'll never get to the ultimate answer, which in the abstract Amy has said very clearly is to overthrow the system. But actually having that argument and sometimes saying those unpopular arguments, which as it becomes bigger and bigger in our movement, Green New Dealism, as it already is going to be one of our biggest political arguments that we have to fight against. So concretely, how can we bring that mass character and that militancy together with the workers' movement, with the direct action groups, with telling that vital truth? We don't have time for election cycles. We don't have time for any version of the parliamentary road, which we know anyway, but with climate change, it's more true than ever.
So after this speaker will be the comrades at 3, just about halfway up, yeah, that's right, who will be the last speaker in the debate. And I just want to apologise. There are 10 people who've put their hand up and who haven't been able to speak, and that's a real shame, but it also shows the breadth of discussion which is taking place today. So thank you so much.
Well, can you hear me? Yeah,
we can, yeah.
I'm proud to say the Socialist Workers' Party has been very active in a number of campaigns. I'm in Plymouth, and we have a march on the local oil storage facilities with Stop the Oil in a couple of weeks' time. We're active with XR and with the campaign against climate change. And just to the last speaker, I'd say that as opposed to us pushing a Green New Deal, the reality is we work very closely in and with the campaign against climate change on the climate jobs issue. Climate jobs is not the same as a Green New Deal. It is actually a very specific set of demands for a national climate service, funding climate jobs to insulate homes right the way through to a complete transformation of the economy. So I think we're very practical and very clear in what the demands are, and that direct action from below is absolutely essential. But I wanted to just thank Amy for highlighting the nuclear industry and nuclear power issue to such an extent, because it is absolutely part of both the fossil fuel industries and infrastructure, and of course war and imperialism. I come from Plymouth. We have a lot of direct action in Plymouth because we have a nuclear dockyard with 13 rusting hulks of nuclear submarines, which they have no answer to disposal of, with the nuclear cores rotting in the heart of those. It costs the private company Babcock £30 million a year to just keep them safe enough, although we have high levels of radiation recorded in our water, our sea and our earth. They are the basis for the small modular reactors that somebody talked about at the back there as the next plan for putting nuclear power stations in every community. What warn you against this? The latest research shows that the small modular reactors that we have in our submarines are responsible for 8 to 20 times as much radioactive leakage as the large reactors. And that has a terrible effect on the environment in itself. So I would say the last thing is we really do need to campaign against nuclear inside the environment movement as well as inside the trade union movement very, very strongly, and understand what's going on here.
Thank you so much.
No? Oh, it's there's
yeah.
not a light to show this. So I think Amy pointed out very rightly about both the Camber oil field, the Jackal oil field. This is an absolute move by just a really audacious move by people in power to try and blame high rising cost of energy and the war in Ukraine to just kind of go ahead with fossil fuel infrastructure. There's probably people in the fracking campaign here as well. The government want to give tax breaks to some of the biggest fracking bosses. I know that Simon Javid is really pushing for fracking and is going to get a new kind of geographical review of Lancashire area to try and frack again. This is despite popular opposition to fracking. This is despite popular opposition to the Camber oil field and the Jackal oil field. It just feels like they just don't care, and of course they don't. And I think this will lead people to say, well, what can we do? We have petitioned, we have protested, we have marched time and time again. What can we possibly do? And I think that often leads people to thinking that we need to disrupt fossil fuel infrastructure at its source. And I'm actually really heartened today to have members of Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, and Just Stop Oil here. I think that's amazing, and I think they should be cheered for what they do. I think an amazing current of militancy we are seeing from groups like this, and also the movement out on the streets with Fridays for Future. And I think at times, some on the left, I wouldn't say that this is just the SWP saying, there's a certain snobbishness about people taking this kind of action. There's a kind of, but this doesn't involve masses of workers. I think that's the wrong conclusion people should take. I think people should take the radicalism of these campaigns and groups and then take in our politics and talk to people and learn from each other about the kind of action we're going to do. A lot of people might have read Andreas Malm, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. I think it's a brilliant book. I think it talks about direct action in a really positive way. And we can continue those arguments. But we also need to say that the mass participation and the involvement of workers is absolutely essential to direct action. We do need to disrupt fossil fuel infrastructure. But to shut them down, we need to have strikes. To shut a factory down, the best way to do it is get workers involved, and I think that's what we should be fighting for now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, comrade, and thank you to everybody who spoke, and to those who weren't able to speak, thank you for your understanding. Before I bring Amy back in, I just want to bring everyone's attention to some books which are available from Bookmarks Bookshop. Amy, as I've already said, is the writer, the author of Capitalism and the Politics of Food, and a contributor to System Change, Not Climate Change. At Marxism this year, we're also releasing a book by Martin Empson, Socialism or Extinction. Amy referred to, and it's also been referred to, the author Andreas Malm and his book Fossil Capital, or his book How to Blow Up a Pipeline. So, in other words, there is so much that we can be reading and our ideas we can be arming ourselves with when it comes to climate, the struggle against climate catastrophe. So please do go to Bookmarks. But without further ado, Amy, thank you so much.
It's fine.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Okay, well look, thanks everyone. Great and thought-provoking discussion. Hopefully going to answer some of the points. May not get to them all, apologies if not. Look, I think we should start with what some people talked about quite rightly, which is the question of climate justice. This has been central to the mobilisations around COP, and quite rightly. And really, what I was trying to show as well in my introduction was how this whole development of fossil fuels really is driven out through questions of competition, but also colonialism and war in that way. And it means when we're confronted with questions today, actually the global north is responsible, historically, for 92% of carbon emissions. Historically, Britain and the US at the heart of that. That's really important because sometimes that's used in some of the arguments in that way. But these are class issues as well. It's not like we've all done this. It's 1% are actually responsible in the world for 50% of carbon emissions. So these things are entwined in that way. And I think quite rightly pointing to the fact of even now, this outsourcing of emissions often, which actually makes no sense in terms of dealing with the issue of climate change. It doesn't actually matter where the emissions come from, it's a global problem. But actually it's this whole idea of targets that you meet. And you know, like even then, Germany, it's done loads of renewables. People say actually still mines and exports its coal, imports lots of stuff from elsewhere, but also the production of things being outsourced to other countries in that way. So these are big debates going on. Right now, there's been quite an interesting debate, funnily enough, at the top of society. Sometimes it's useful to read the Financial Times. It tells you a lot about energy and things like that. And they've had a bit of a debate. Will these supply shortages that are going on and everything with oil and gas lead to much more move into the renewables or not? Will it go into oil and gas? And at first they were saying, well, it should make sense for people to move into renewables to plug the gap. But that's not been happening. Now we're sort of saying, actually it hasn't happened. Partly because there's very high price of oil, whereas it's gone up, encourages people to think, let's make some more profits from that and move into it. And actually not investing in the areas that we need. And it shows the market doesn't work. It shows that market of competition, the heart of capitalism, can't solve these problems on any level in that way. I think as well, it is brilliant that we're having a debate about the movement itself and people here from different groups coming together to discuss those things. Before I get to that though, actually I'm just going to say something about nuclear power because people have mentioned that. I just think as well this is another thing about how the market can't solve it, but how capitalism often wants to find these shortcut solutions of technology. You see a lot of these, they try and say, don't worry, there's these small reactors for nuclear power being built and they're much more safe. A lot of them are not ready. They're just at the simulation level. It's like this futuristic idea that will solve it so we can just carry on as we want to do so. Actually, one of the issues, which again is interesting, is the reason there's so many accidents in the nuclear industry generating energy is because the reactors they use stem from the original military prototypes. They were never built to deal with production of energy itself, and that has continued. And I would urge people, actually talking about books, I've just read this book called Atoms and Ashes, From Bikini Atoll to Fukushima by Sir Hai Plokhai. I would buy it. It is absolutely, it's chilling reading, compulsive reading about history of nuclear accidents. And by the way, I learnt, just have to share this, the whole term, the word bikini, as in the clothing, was named after these tests in a place in the Marshall Islands, Bikini Atoll, where they tested nuclear weapons because they said the bikini as an item of clothing was so explosive, making light of the impact on Indigenous people in the Marshall Islands and combining it with some sexism. You see how this whole thing connects, but I don't want to make light of it. It's shocking, really, these things of how they are. But that's why it's brilliant we've come together to discuss some of these issues, I think. And that has been brilliant. You see, since 2019, really, there was a rising arc, wasn't there, of climate struggles, Extinction Rebellion, the school strikes, and very much so. Socialist Worker Party members were part of Extinction Rebellion groups in as many areas as we were, and very much welcomed those big mobilisations. I actually think Extinction Rebellion was at its best when it went for the mass mobilisations in the centre of London, collectively coming together, and that anyone could be involved in. And it did bring together many people in that way. And I think that's the sort of spirit we have to think, well, how do we deepen that and take that forward, really? Because I don't think we should counterpose things either. It's not like we're going to do a blockade here and then we have something else here. I think we have to think, how do we take some of those lessons of maximum disruption, but think, how do we disrupt those at the top of society the most? How do you disrupt those who are making their profits from the oil and gas and coal industries? How do we disrupt that infrastructure? Actually, one of the most disruptive things, of course, is when people go on strike, because you're actually disrupting the whole production and profits being made. When the lorry drivers at Grangemouth, which is a massive it's a refinery really, and petrochemical works owned by INEOS, when they went on strike, actually it impacted massively. We have to think about that and how that links to other areas, but also think about how you bring those things together. I think there are going to be some big battles about fracking. Now, I know people in this room were part of some of the battles against fracking at Preston New Roads in the northwest when there was a fracking site proposed. And there were people there every day protesting, but they also did mass mobilisations which brought trade unionists from across the northwest to there to show their solidarity and be part of that and then take their message back to their workplaces. These are the sort of things we're going to have to go back to, I think, to deepen the disruption so it doesn't fall back to being very brave and dedicated individuals, but it's something we draw in more and more people to be part of. And actually, just as part of this, someone mentioned the Green New Deal. You see, I don't know if that is the biggest debate in some ways, to be honest with you. I mean, in some ways it became a focus, but in some ways it doesn't feel to be on the agenda at the moment. Corbyn proposed it, he's nowhere near to be near Parliament. Biden said it means absolutely nothing. As I say, he's urging more coal and oil production at the moment to meet that gap. He's actually actively trying to get people, I think, to start fracking again. So I don't think it's the same orientation in that way at all. And actually, to be honest with you, a Green New Deal, when it was there, can mean anything to anybody. We're about fighting that to be the most radical thing that it can be possible. But it's also about how you fight for it. Is it something just delivered from on high? Actually, no. I think these are things we have to fight for, to shape and put on the agenda, just like the climate movement has put on the agenda the issue of climate catastrophe. And as part of that, someone mentioned we're part of the campaign against climate change, and this newly updated Climate Jobs book is brilliant if you want the details of actually how we could transition and renewables. And it's I would urge people to read that. And it's a tool. It's not an abstract. It's to try and win people so we don't pitch against each other. Because that's one of the things I think coming out here really. I think we face a situation where those at the top will attempt to divide us. They will attempt to say, well, it's the fault of green energy that your prices are rising for gas and electricity. Oh, nuclear is the solution to try and attempt to divide us. All these things. Oh, we have to do this for the war effort, which actually is horrific and not benefiting us and everything else. And so they will use these things, I think, to divide us and pitch us together. And we're about how we bring these issues together because they're a consequence of the same system. And the people that benefit are at the top and they have no answers, and the solutions they do have make the situation worse and cannot answer it. And so that's why, for us, I think we've gone through some brilliant examples of the things we're going to do and the tasks ahead of us and how we can work together. But we can't just keep fighting and having those gains rolled back like they did around some of those climate movements. If we understand them to be central to the system of capitalism, and we look at the historical development of how fossil fuels are absolutely central to it and how war is a consequence of capitalism too, we have to conclude we have to get rid of that system. And that is not abstract. That is about us using that power that we see when we go on strike, protest, disrupt together to take that forward beyond those immediate demands to actually challenge that whole system and bring it down. And that's why this has been part of a discussion about how we get that change and also about a different sort of world. And for us, in the Socialist Workers' Party, we want you to be actually in that fight with us. And that's why we're asking people to join us. If you agree with what we've talked about today, then we would like you to join our organisation so we're stronger in those bigger tasks that we face after we leave this festival. Thank you very much.